Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Read M. My name is Emily, and today I'm going to be telling you all about the Severance novellas so that you don't have to read them. Although if you're a fan of the show, I'd really recommend you do. So if you're watching this video, I would assume you've heard of the hit Apple TV show Severance, a sci-fi thriller that came out in 2022. It premiered to much critical acclaim, garnering 14 Emmy nominations and even 2 wins. However, if you were part of the fan base at the time, you would know that the critical popularity did not exactly translate to a number of viewers. I would say that if you looked up the words Severance edit on Instagram in that era, you'd probably come across like maybe 3 reels. And if you told your friends in real life that you were watching a show called Severance, I think their brain would just kind of autofill it with the word Succession. And this phenomenon made it all the more infuriating when all 12 of us fans had to watch that batshit season finale and wait 3 years to get a resolution to that cliffhanger. Speaking of, if you're still watching this video and have not seen the show and are interested in it, please click away immediately because I'm going to be diving into spoilers. And if you're still watching this video and don't have interest in watching a TV show, I would say you're missing out on some of the most culturally relevant commentary on TV right now. And you also won't get to know what the goats mean, so take from that what you will. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to officially dive into spoiler territory and start explaining to you the 2 novellas that Severance has put out so far, The Lexington Letter and The UUR. The Lexington Letter was released for free by Apple Books in March 2022, 1 month after the premiere of the show. As the title suggests, the novella is written as a letter from our main character, Margaret Peg Kincaid, who's writing it to a journalist with the hopes of exposing Lumen as a company, because she is an ex-employee who was severed. What secrets does she want to expose exactly? We aren't really sure, but Peg has her suspicions as to what the company is really doing. And this is the main question of the entire show. What is macrodata refinement? What is Lumen? And why is it so important? We know the work is mysterious and important, but what are they actually doing? Of course, this novella does not actually give us a concrete answer. However, it does give us theories, or maybe anti-theories, if that's how you prefer to interpret it. Through observations she's made within the company and outside of it, Peg determines that what she believes MDR is doing is orchestrating terrorist attacks against other companies. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second because when I read this, I actually just didn't know what to do with myself. The way that she comes to this conclusion is that she's able to link the timing of completing files within the office with terrorist attacks in the outside world. But how is she able to link these timings, you ask? If she's severed, how would she know what her innie and outie are both doing? The answer to this question is a little something called Puglish. Puglish is a secret language that Peg invented with her sister in childhood. And because it's a secret language that uses nonsensical writing, fake letters, the code detectors within the office do not detect it as a language at all. Thus, she's able to sneak messages in and out of Lumen using the secret language. It's through these messages that she finds out that within 2 minutes of her innie completing the Lexington file, a truck bombing occurs in New York. And this truck bombing is called the Dorner truck explosion, and this will matter again much later in this video. With this information being exchanged between her innie and outie, Peg decides she's going to become a whistleblower. And this is the reason why the letter has fallen into the hands of a journalist. And the journalist's emails are what we are reading as the final form of the novella. But after she makes this decision, Peg is followed for days on end and has her mail tampered with, and she's hiding in a hotel room when, after however long, she is actually found dead. Not only is she found dead, we come to find out that she's been killed. And the part that really blows my mind here, and is about to blow yours, is that the way she was killed may not seem so suspicious, except for the fact that it's all too familiar. She's killed in a car wreck. If you've watched Severance, you know car wrecks don't just mean nothing. It's exactly the same way that Mark's late wife Gemma died. The same Gemma that has been somehow transformed into Miss Casey within the walls of Lumen. And if you think that's a crazy connection, just wait for what I'm about to tell you next. So with Peg dead, the journalist who has all these allegations in hand doesn't quite know how to move forward. So she sends everything she has to her superior. And her superior tells her she should actually just ignore the story, because this woman's dead, there's no way to prove anything she says is true, and in fact, he actually knows someone high up at Lumen and asked them for their opinion. And he was told that Peg was just an angry ex-employee because she was fired for a lot of absences. So that's the only reason she wants to get back at the company, is because she was unjustly terminated. And all that doesn't seem too special. Of course, a big corporation would want to cover up any allegations against them. But what really stands out here is that the contact within Lumen that this journalist is claiming to know is someone that we know very well. The name of this character is never revealed, but the name of the journalist is. He goes by Jim Milchick. Now, if you watch Severance, we all know Seth Milchick. So that makes this connection story a little bit more credible. I wish I could say that what we learn in this novella provides valuable insight as to what MDR is really doing, but I don't think I can confidently say that because I don't think the show would reveal something so massive in a novella they released for free on Apple Books. So instead of this being my theory, I do think it has to be my anti-theory. Maybe it contains hints as to what the real work might be, like that it has something to do with nefarious real-world consequences, but I don't think they would just flat out give away the entire answer to the show in something like this. And given what we know from season 2 so far, I think we're all kind of in the same boat believing that the work has something to do with refining human personalities. And that is when a core, fundamental concept of severance comes in. One that I didn't fully grasp until I read the second half of what the Lexington Letter is. The Lexington Letter does not only contain the titular letter, it also contains the Macro Data Refiner's Orientation Booklet. I'm reading it off my script here. And yes, I also got a lot of this information from the Severance wiki. Before we dive into that core fundamental concept, I'm going to point out where I first observed it in the show. So one of the most memorable moments for me from season 1 was the waffle party. What starts as a seemingly innocuous reward for corporate achievement becomes a weird sex cult dance party. It just occurs in that episode and is never again referenced. However, the iconography of this moment does come back because the 4 dancers at this weird sex party are wearing masks. Those same masks or images are reflected in paintings in other parts of the show, namely the painting Kier Taming the Four Tempers, which we see in a scene with Bert and Irving. The idea of the 4 tempers is essential to the ethos of Lumen Industries. To be a devout worker at this company, you have to subscribe to worship the religious figure that is the founder, Kier Egan. And his doctrine states that the 4 tempers make up the human soul, and they're known as woe, frolic, malice, and dread. Now, this idea is not completely foreign to the real world because there is an archaic belief about the humors of the body. In real human history, it was thought that blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile needed to be properly balanced in order to achieve and maintain health. And if any of these 4 elements were off balance, a person could become excessively sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, or melancholy. And I don't know about you, but I feel like those personality imbalances are sort of similar to the idea of the 4 tempers that we have within Severance. And these tempers line up perfectly with the iconography I mentioned before from the sex party. The dancers are dressed as the fool, the bride, the crone, and the ram, although there's also debate about whether or not it's really a ram or a goat, because there's so much goat iconography around the rest of the show. So we can call it ram or goat interchangeably. I'm gonna keep calling it the ram, but we don't really know if it's a goat. Each of these icons corresponds to one of the 4 tempers. While the bride, being woe, is the only one that has been canonically confirmed to be a match between the temper and the icon, it's just generally agreed upon that the crone represents dread, the fool represents frolic, and the ram for malice. I do think that the ram and the crone might be able to be interchanged, but because goats or rams are so often associated with like the devil and also the malicious mammalian nurturable department in season 2, I'm getting malice vibes from Mr. Ram, but I think it's kind of up for debate still technically. Now, these tempers are not just generally important in the religious aspect of the company, they're also a defining factor in what MDR is doing, and we know that for certain because we can see macrodata refinement screens and we can see what they do with the numbers that are scary. When they place them in 5 bins, a little screen pops up and it shows different levels of things. And it shows that the levels that they're contributing to with these scary numbers are the levels of each of the 4 tempers. They are trying somehow, in some way, to maintain a balance. And because now, officially in season 2, we know that these files apply to people, it seems like what they are doing as their work is refining personalities. And technically it is true, we don't know for sure if every single file applies to a person. We do know for absolute certain that the file Cold Harbor applies specifically to Miss Casey. And I think it's fair to extrapolate that this means the files in general correspond to people. Now, this part that I'm about to say is actually not an original thought of mine. It is something I directly drew from the Severance wiki, and I will link it down below. But this wiki has observed that the 5 bins might correspond to the 5 different types of brainwaves. But no matter what the bins exactly represent, we we know that they're refining and balancing the levels of the four tempers within it, and that it directly applies to a person, at the very least Miss Casey. The other thing I've noticed about the MDR files is that they're all named after places, which is a little bit strange given the fact that we now assume that they all actually have to do with people. Now, this is the part when all of my research devolves into truly what are just personal theories. Thinking about the idea of place names, my mind immediately jumps to the fact that the show takes place in a fictional city in a fictional state called Kier, PE. However, we know that Kier, PE is in the real United States because in the Lexington letter, we know that the journalists are based in Topeka, Kansas. But how do these place names and people connect? I'm not entirely sure, but I do have some ideas from the episode that just aired recently called Attila. In this episode, we see a frame where Irving has collected all the names of Lumen employees, and in this frame we see that some letters, or maybe even pairs of letters, have been underlined. If it is actually pairs of letters, I'm thinking maybe it could somehow connect to the names of files. For example, Gemma Scout could potentially connect to her file name Cold Harbor if the letters CO were ones that stood out. I'm not even entirely convinced by what I just said, but I am convinced that this is probably at least maybe a half-baked theory and not just a completely useless one. So if you're a little smarter than me and can put the pieces together more properly, let me know in the comments down below. Now I think we finally gleaned most of what we can get from the Lexington letter itself, so I'm going to move on to talk about The UUR by Dr. Rickon Laszlo Hale. This novella came out a few weeks ago during the release of season 2, and within the show it is a self-help book written by Devon's husband that somehow makes its way into Lumen headquarters and is kind of used as a Bible of sorts by the innies. Now don't worry, I have less to say about this one because it's only 39 pages and is only an excerpt of the book. It's actually only the first 8 chapters plus an author's note and a follow-up and things like that, and it's mostly comedic, so it won't babble on as long. That being said, folded into all of Rickon's nonsense are some very intriguing anecdotes. But even though this whole thing was mostly comedic, there was one question eating away at my mind the entire time I was reading it, and that was, is this the innie version of the book or the outie one? Because in season 2, we find out that Rickon has been given the opportunity to adapt his original work into some sort of manual for innies. And when this novella was released, they did not announce officially which version of the book this was. And in the author's note in the beginning of the book, Rickon apologizes for delays in the publication of his book because of corporate parties. Obviously, this made me think that Lumen delayed the publication of his book, and this was the innie version. However, upon reading it, there were a few details that made me think that that wasn't possible. Luckily, I did not have to go through figuring out the logistics of it from the text itself because I stumbled across a little something called the Lumen Industries LinkedIn. Yes, this is a real LinkedIn page, and they post on it very regularly, including what they just posted last night of an 8-hour lo-fi playlist of the score of the show remixed by Odessa. That is a real thing that they have posted, and it's entirely original for the entire 8 hours. It's kind of iconic. I did listen to it while writing this entire script. But the other thing they posted was this post. And this post confirms that the version of the book that we have read is the original unadulterated text, because they are mad that this version of the chapters have leaked into the world. Now, while I wish I could delight you with the juicy details of Rickon's life, such as his birth being a performance art piece performed by the duo Hump Dumpster, aka his parents, entitled Smells Like Afterbirth Fucker, I do have to narrow my focus to the details that are actually relevant. But if you want to hear more about all things Rickon, I would give it a read. It's 39 pages. It really won't take you long. The stuff that actually matters, though, is what we're going to focus on, and that started in chapter 2, because there was a throwaway reference to something called the Dorner truck explosion. And if you've been paying attention to this video at all, you know why that matters. The same incident is described in the Lexington letter and has never once been mentioned in the TV show, to my knowledge. So this makes me feel like the attack really can't mean nothing, because it has now been mentioned in 2 supplementary texts to the show. So the work thing is probably still an anti-theory. I don't think that's what they're doing. We know they're doing something that has to do with people, but why is this explosion so important? Or is it not that important and they're just uniting the text in like an interesting and fun, clever way? I don't know. But I'm curious. And I'm also curious if it will ever be referenced in the show. We'll see, I guess. Chapter 2 also contains an anecdote about a hike that Devon and Rickon went on with close family. The versions of the characters in this book are called Flip and Nan, but by reading the anecdote itself, we are able to figure out that Flip and Nan are Mark and Gemma. It's interesting to note that the name Flip was chosen by Rickon, clearly, to write this book, and it seems to me like almost a subtle dig towards Mark for choosing to get severed and having like a flipped personality, and this little frosty disdain towards Mark makes more sense with the context of what I'm about to tell you happens in the book later. While the rest of the hike sequence is relatively just comedic and inconsequential, there are two parts that stand out to me, and they are Rickon's fascination with worker bees and Mark's completely different personality pre-death of Gemma. In the wilderness, the group comes upon a beehive. There's a comedic moment where Rickon doesn't know what a beehive is. In classic Rickon fashion, he starts making these grandiose philosophical statements about bees and work and all these things. But just knowing the motifs of the show, it makes me think about the fact that he is so anti-severance, it seems, within the show. But he's like praising these bees for what good workers they are and for knowing their place and knowing that they're just animals and like having a purpose. And it's making me wonder if we're gonna get like a Rickon evil arc, because, you know, even in season 2 he's been like writing the book for the innies and he cares more about that than Devon's protests about it. So I'm just wondering if, like, even though his original book was so anti like being part of the machine, these like interesting observations, I guess this is the book itself, this is within the book, he's saying that worker bees are interesting and beautiful and know their place. So I'm just wondering, like, is his mind malleable towards Lumen? I'm a little bit worried. And then the other thing that happens is that on this hiking trip, maybe it was also a camping trip, I don't really remember the exact details, Mark starts essentially twerking on Rickon and giving him a sting attack as like a joke. And when I read this, I wasn't exactly sure yet if Flip and Nan were Mark and Gemma, and then I was like, oh my god, wait, it's just not. Like, there's no way that's Mark. There is no universe when Mark would start rubbing his butt onto Rickon. He hates Rickon. Like, I don't understand. Like, also Mark just wouldn't do that. Like, he's so depressed. Eventually, later in the book, I realized it. Like, it has to be them because Nan dies in a car crash. So it's like, okay. And like, yeah, whatever. We know for a fact that that's them. But when that scene happened, I was like, there's just no way that's Mark. But now I discovered that that is Mark. It's just pre-Gemma death. Like, he truly did become severely, severely depressed and have an entire personality shift separate from that of being severed. And I don't think we've ever gotten to see true happy Mark in the show at any point from like pre-Gemma death. So this is like one of the only scenes where we get to see that side of him. The new version of Mark, however, we have seen obviously a lot in the show. We also get to see within this text. That starts to happen in chapter 7, entitled Wounds Unhealed, when we get to see Mark at his lowest of low, and we get to see the real conflict between Rickon and Mark that's caused their relationship to be so icy. So after the death of Gemma, Rickon shows up to Mark's new Lumen house at some point and asks if he can get a cassette tape from his basement that he had gifted to Gemma. Mark is really drunk and really angry and refuses to give him this tape for a long time, and in a fit of rage, he reveals to Rickon that Gemma was always just humoring him. Gemma and him were never friends. Like, Gemma always laughed with Rickon, and Rickon always thought they got along really well, and she would really just like feed into whatever he wanted to talk about. But Mark says, like, Rickon, she was never laughing with you. There was not one moment when you and her were connecting. Every single time that you left the room, we laughed at you. Every single time you leave the room, everyone laughs at you. And obviously this was very painful for Rickon, as it should be. That is a very mean thing to say. And so their relationship has just been icy since then. And apparently he did apologize at some point. And this incident, officially, according to the text, occurred 1 year before the show beginning. So they've had some time to like simmer down a bit, but there's clearly tension between them still, and we finally have the real backstory as to why. The rest of the novella is just mostly comedic stuff about Rickon's life, but also like a little bit sad if you really think about it deeply, and Rickon's writing style is actually kind of commendable, and like, just because it's so consistent, I don't know, I kind of had a good time reading it and I'd recommend, but I don't think the rest of it is like hugely important to the show at all. But if you like the show and you like to read, you might as well just read it because it was kind of fun. Alright, so for the remainder of this video, I'm getting a little bit less organized and just kind of spitball random theories I have about the show now, mostly about season 2, and honestly most of them are from the most recent episode that I watched since recording. I think a new episode will have come out by the time I post this, but this is all mostly from the episode Attila. In this episode, we get to know Bert better than ever before. At least his outie, and not his innie. We learn that he joined Lumen and opted to get severed because of a church sermon where he became aware of the fact that innies have the ability to go to heaven regardless of whether or not their outies do. And he goes to a Lutheran church, which is important to note. Outie Bert believes that because of things he's done in his past, he will never go to heaven. So by severing, at least part of his soul will have a chance to go to heaven and be with his husband, while his outie one will not. And this concern with being good enough stands out to me in many ways. First of all, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I really do not know a lot about this, but I was told by a friend, and I tried to do some research online, and it seems like this is maybe the case for a lot of people. Many Lutherans would not believe that actions determine whether or not you will go to heaven, and that belief is actually the core principle that will get you through those gates. So I think it's possible that he's lying about this cover story. And I'm not just saying that because of the religious intricacies. I'm also saying it because the show has kind of done this before with a similar motif. In season 1, I think in episodes 1 and 2 maybe, or one of those ones, Cobell tells Annie Mark that her mother was an atheist. He gives a little anecdote about hell. And then later in the episode, when you find out she's not severed, she tells Audie Mark her mother was a Catholic and gives a little anecdote about saints. So this lying about being severed timelines combined with different sects of Christianity motif has happened before. So I'm a little curious about that. I feel like it could be a little foreshadowing Easter egg sign situation. But maybe I'm reading into it too much, I don't know. But I have more support for this. The other obvious thing about that scene that was a lie or somehow wrong was that Bert told Irving that he joined Lumen 20 years ago. And then Irving points out that the severance procedure didn't exist until 12 years ago. And then they kind of just agree this was a confusion on Bert's part, but I'm not entirely sure, obviously, that it was. There is obviously the solution, maybe, that he joined as a non-severed employee, or maybe he was some sort of founder and doesn't want Irving to know. I don't know. That's the other thing. He's clearly lying about something on that front. Something's fishy there. This whole lying and being concerned with good thing also makes me really suspicious of Bert's name. His name is literally Bert Goodman. Bert Goodman. And that just seems quite on the nose for someone whose entire motivation to become severed was being a good man. So if you're gonna lie about something and pick a fake any name, that might have been what came to mind. Not to mention the fact that his husband apparently calls him Attila after Attila the Hun, who is famous for being a historical ruler and being very successful at military conquest, which, on the modern scale is not really considered one of the most moral things to do. I also noticed a pretty prominent clown painting in his home, and just to me, that conjures up the feeling of masking sadness or a sad soul or a bad soul with a smile painted on. And that was just kind of serving Severed to me also, in a supporting Severance way. So I don't know why that painting would be so huge and massive. Really stood out to me in the house when Bert theoretically is not super happy about Lumen. But if he actually is a spy or something, then he clearly is super happy about Lumen. So that's my whole Bert theory thing. I think that one's the most fully formed. But the final loose threads I'll leave you with before closing out this video are very much just threads. So I'd love to hear your opinions on them and just any actual better research you have on these last two things in the comments below. So firstly, the exports elevator is the biggest glaring mystery we have at the moment. We obviously know that it points down, not up, so that suggests there is another basement floor beneath the severed floor. And the massive theory that some people have and that I could consider thinking about is that there might be multiple layers of being severed. Who's to say you have an innie and an outie? Who's not to say you have a outie and then innie 1, innie 2, innie 3, innie 4. You could have as many as you want, because your innie doesn't know how much time is passing ever. Only your outie would be able to know that, but if they go to work every day and become a different innie every time, there's no way the innies or outie, no one would know except for people who work there that are not severed. That's possible, but it almost feels too big for the scope of the show right now. If I don't know how that would work narratively, but it is possible. So I'm just thinking about that. And also it's important to note that we have actually seen the elevator being used in one of the most recent episodes when it had the cold open with the guy whose face we never saw who went into the elevator dinged. And what we know from the normal severed elevator is it only dings when someone shifts from outie to innie or innie to outie. Only shifts for someone who's severed. So if someone's going down, they're either shifting to become their outie again, or shifting to become an innie because they weren't on that floor, or shifting to become a third innie. There was severance involved if we're consistent with the elevator beeping situation. This part of what I'm going to talk about is, I don't even know if it's relevant, but I just noticed that in the episode Attila, there was a decent amount of jazz music playing. I'm pretty sure it was in the scene with Irving and Bert. I could be wrong. I don't remember exactly when it played in the episode. But when I heard that, because normally the score of the show is just the score of the show, all I thought of was Defiant Jazz, because in season 1 they classify Helly as Defiant Jazz, or she picks Defiant Jazz as her song, and then that made me think oh, are they gonna start using jazz music whenever characters are being defiant? I don't know if it made any sense, but I could see it for Irving. I don't know about Bert. I'm a little suspicious of Bert now, but maybe jazz is just gonna be the defiant vibe from now on. And lastly, the other thing I need to know is, who is Hannah? In that episode also, Helena refers to Gemma as Hannah. There's so many reasons why this could be, and I'm just trying to figure out which one is true. It could have just been some sort of test to see like if Innie and Outie Mark will somehow like confuse the names in some way, like eventually, I don't know. It also could just be Miss Casey's first name, or it could just be something else entirely. Like I don't understand exactly what it is, and I want to know if there's any significance to the fact that the names are like kind of like weirdly like harmonious. Like Hannah and Gemma, they have like the same like first letter, second letter, vowel, and then like 2 repeating consonants, whatever. And then also H is only 1 letter off from G and M is only 1 letter off from N. So I'm like, is there a reason that's happening? Or is it just like some weird coincidence? Like, I don't know. I need to know, like, if you're smarter than me and you figured this out, like tell me. But like, I just feel like something's happening there. Anyway, if you're still watching this video, I'm honestly impressed, especially because the end really just devolved. But I want to hear all of your theories and thoughts, because I've been on the wiki, I've been on the Reddits, I've been everywhere, and like, I can be convinced of so many things, but I have yet to find like the ultimate severance solution. Like, I don't think anyone's cracked it yet. And I just want to know, like, I kind of want to be the person who cracked it, but I'm just not that person yet. Maybe we don't have enough information, and I'm very excited to watch the episode from today when I'm posting this video. So maybe that will ruin all of my theories and blow up everything. Excited to see, but please comment down below anything you have thought of. Please